So, I always get questions about oil and gas subsidies. Now I got a question about renewables and their subsidies. How much is the wind energy business subsidized? We'll talk about renewables altogether. And I am using data from the Institute for Energy Research, which basically gets their data from the same place I do, the EIA. So this is the source, the Institute for Energy Resource, if you want to look any of this stuff up yourself. So this is from 2016 to 22, traditional fuels, natural gas, oil, coal, all that, received 15% of all subsidies. Renewables, conservation, and end use received 85%. That's a big number. On a chart, it looks like this. Here's renewables. Over to the far right, that's end use. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. This is fossil fuels. Natural gas, oil, this is coal. This is renewables. This is their subsidies. Now, what is end use subsidies? That is where we give low-income people money to pay their utility bills. That's a lot, over $8 billion a year. Now, down here below, you can see federal subsidies and incentives to support renewable energy in fiscal year 2022 were almost 5 times higher than those for fossil fuels. These are federal subsidies only. They don't include any state or local subsidies that can be added on. Oh, in addition, they don't include anything that was added in the Inflation Reduction Act. And that's a lot. So how does all this work out? Fossil fuels gets 15% of the subsidies and produce 80%, 79.1% of the energy. Renewables gets well over half of all subsidies and produces wind, 3.7%, solar, 1.8%, hydroelectric, 2.3%. Wind and solar produce 5.5% of all of our electricity while getting over half the subsidies. So this chart right here shows the breakdown. Blue is fossil fuels, orange, everything else. When you take out nuclear, that brings that number down to 13%, and that reflects every single kind of renewable energy. Wind, solar, biomass, which is a pretty big one, and hydroelectric. But of that 13% that is there, when you take out nuclear, 5.5% of it is wind and solar, and they get all the subsidies. Biomass, hydroelectric, they don't get hardly jack shit. So to summarize, wind and solar get over half of all subsidies and produce 5.5% of all energy. Fossil fuels get 15% of all subsidies and produce roughly 80% of all energy. But this is about to change a lot with the Inflation Reduction Act. And that is because the Inflation Reduction Act is going to add up to $372 billion in clean energy subsidies over the next 10 years. So up to $37 billion a year extra on top of everything I just showed you. This is additional stuff. This is going to be added to what I just showed you. Now, one thing that drives a lot of the subsidies is the amount of investment that goes into something. So when we look at oil and gas subsidies, they're actually decreasing by quite a bit. And that is because the oil and gas industry has become much more efficient. We don't have to drill as many wells as we used to increase production. We're better at what we do. That means we get less subsidies because the way the subsidies are structured, you go drill a well, you get a tax deduction for what you spent on drilling that well. If your wells can produce 2 or 3 times more than they did in the past, and you only have to drill half as many to increase production, then you only get to receive half the tax subsidies or tax deductions because it's based on what you spend. So the reason these renewable subsidies are so high is because that is also tax incentives that is based on what you spend. At current projections, wind energy will eventually receive about 20 times the subsidies that oil and gas does. But by 2050, will only produce 10% of the total energy in the United States. And that is why I am such a proponent of nuclear energy, because as a taxpayer, if we're going to subsidize something, I want to subsidize the thing that is going to provide us with what we need. Nuclear can do that. Wind has a place, but it can't do what nuclear can do. Not in any universe. No. Thanks.